All right. My name's Edward Escobar. I'm an English teacher at Kyoto Gaidai Nishi High School here in Kyoto. I'm the foreign staff coordinator there, and I also kind of overlook the curriculum of a course. And today I want to talk to you about a project that we were involved in called the Literalist Campaign, which is a project that came about through the Young Reporters for the Environment. And this particular 3-year project that we were involved in was also supported through UNESCO. So UNESCO is actually kind of like the people that were kind of overlooking this 3-year project. Okay, and so really, I just want to say we were actually quite proud of what we were able to accomplish with this, and so much so that that this project actually got presented as one of 100 kind of climate education projects or activities at the COP28 a couple of years ago. So the UNESCO's Environment Conference. And to be honest, we were actually a little bit surprised that they asked us to include that, because what I'm going to present to you is not necessarily something that's considered like climate action or any kind of like a initiative activity or anything. It was more in relation to research and observation was our primary focus. And so when I brought this to the person who was talking to us about this, they pretty much said this, students need to learn about the climate change, science, mitigation, and all that to make a positive contribution in the future. However, as children didn't cause the climate crisis, they should not have to fix it. That's for adults to do. And so after that, we said okay, and we ended up getting our project up on the one of the 100 shown at the climate conference a few years ago through a program called Teachers for the Planet. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. A little story about how we went through this 3-year initiative. So before I start, just a little bit about our school's curriculum, or not necessarily our school, but our course's curriculum. And just want to keep in mind is that the English classes that students are involved in this particular course actually have 2 separate English classes, one that just the Japanese teachers are teaching, one that the foreign teachers are just teaching. And so this represents the foreign teachers, 5 key themes that are kind of integrated through a 3-year curriculum, supported through a number of activities and methods. The way that it's set up is that activities or tasks are scaffolded throughout the 3 years, so whatever's done previous is actually incorporated into the next activity, and so on and so on and so on. So our curriculum can be considered having a CLIL-based structure, and the great thing is that we're not under the jurisdiction of any of ministry curriculum requirements. Okay, so I mean that kind of means we can do whatever we want, but it's nice to have a group of teachers who know how to put something like this together. And so the Literalist Campaign has actually been around for quite a while. And kind of the goals of the Literalist Campaign is to tackle global and litter waste issues, show why we need to be responsible for consumption and pollution reduction. And the most important thing is involving students in environmental journalism and community projects. So I said this was actually originally initiated by the Young Reporters for the Environment program. And then what we went through was actually was more UNESCO involved. Okay, and so if I take you to a website here, so about 18 countries were involved in this 3-year project, Japan being one of them. Our school was the only school from Japan to participate in this. And if we take a look a little bit at what some of the schools are doing, a lot of active participation activities, community involvement, and there's just some really great things that were happening here. And if I take you down to Japan, what we were told is that our approach is actually quite unique, mostly because we were the only one who actually put a 3-year program together. And through that, while everyone else was just kind of doing tasks here and there. And so you can see a little bit of the photos that we were involved. And so mostly our program was involved happening on kind of on the left side here, photos. Now a lot on the right side here, but a lot of these were actually through club initiatives that are already taking place. So that all kind of was able to connect in together. Okay. Our project over the 3 years can be divided up into 4 parts. The first part 1. First, before I introduce these, I just want to let you know that in our course cohort, there's an A class and a B class. Okay, and so what we wanted to do is we wanted to have these classes talk to each other. So whatever A class learned, they shared with B class. Whatever B class learned, they shared with A class. Okay, so kind of this information exchange is what we wanted to really focus on. And so part 1 started with the A class as first-year students. They received information from group assignments structured by students at Kyoto University of Foreign Studies in their Department of Global Engagement. And then after those classes were completed, the A class then presented what they learned to the B class. Then in part 2, the B class, a few months later, actually took a 5-week study abroad to New Zealand. And while in that New Zealand, they were tasked with conducting observation surveys while they were there. When they returned back to Japan, they then presented their findings to the A class. Then in part 3, A class did the same thing. A class, they did their study abroad in Canada, and then while they were in Canada, they conducted the surveys, they came home, and then they reported their findings to the B class. And then finally in part 4, both the A class and B class, based on everything they learned in those 2 years, funneled that information into a Model United Nations as third-year students. And so if I was going to put this as sort of like an image, it will kind of look like this. So A class and B class continue, giving each other information, and then information funneling into a Model United Nations. Okay. Part 1, just a little bit more specific. So A class received special classes, as I said, from Kyoto University of Foreign Studies students. The two students that were teaching this class were actually graduates of the high school, so it actually kind of worked out pretty well. The classes were conducted in English over a course of 13 weeks, so 1 class per week. And they decided to focus on food package issues in Japan, so the plastic issue, with the goal of paraphrasing and presenting that information to the B class, which is exactly what the A class did. Okay, so they were put into small groups, and then each group gave a presentation. This is the B class students kind of sitting in front. Okay. Then, so that was done in December of their first year. And then in February, the B class went to New Zealand for 5 weeks. And so once a week over Google Classroom, they were given surveys that they had to conduct. Really simple surveys. And each survey had to do with a different location. So at their host family's home, at their school, at the supermarket, and at a park. Okay? And we wanted to make sure that there was no judgment involved in these surveys, only observation. Okay? And so what they need, the overall goal was to compare similarities and differences between what they understand as a practice in Japan and what they saw in New Zealand. And I think I can show you an example of what the form looked like. And very simple. Very, very simple. Okay? So this form was the first one that involved their host families. And so, a couple questions just to kind of get an idea of what we wanted them to look at. And then one very simple Likert scale, right? So what you see in your host family, is it the same as in Japan, or is it different? About 2 sentences explaining why, and then we asked them to take a photo. Okay? These are some examples of the photos that we saw. And this student kind of went above and beyond, was doing, kind of telling us what she was looking at. But some of the things that were pointed out is, one, a lot of Japanese students have never seen a compost, or let alone a compost inside the household. Another thing they took notice is that the recyclings were mixed. So you got plastic and paper all in the same place. You see the same thing in this photo as well. You got glass and tin in the same place. And they've never seen this before. So if you've ever been to New Zealand or the US or Canada, they have been specifically designed for the city to pick up, right? And so these are some examples of what students had wrote as comments, okay? So, you know, mostly same in Japan, but again, as I said, they've never seen a composter in the house. Those who live out in the countryside, sure, they've seen them out on the farms, but not inside the house. This student, for whatever reason, said that New Zealand has a more public commitment to the plastic issue than Japan. I thought that was kind of interesting. It actually surprised me a little bit. And then this student kind of made comment that the rules are different because maybe the sizes of the houses are different. So of course New Zealand would have larger houses. You know, maybe that's why the recycling is different, okay? There were no right or wrong answers here. It was just observation only, okay? So when the B class returned back, again, once a week, they were given the opportunity to put presentations together. And so there were 4 parts in this presentation that they had to explain. They had to explain what their practices were in Japan, what they saw in New Zealand, a comparison of the two, and then for the first time we asked them to make a judgment. What do you think was the better practice between the two countries? Okay. You see here, this group was the supermarket group, and they talked a lot about the eggs because the egg cartons were cardboard over there, while here in Japan they're plastic. And so, but they also took a look at, they also took a photo of the shampoo, and actually said there's no refill bags, so you have to buy an entirely new plastic bottle every time you want to buy shampoo. So they were seeing pluses and minuses in both countries, which is exactly what we wanted them to do. Okay, and so part 3. Oh, and they did those presentations to the A class. Okay, and so a few months later, the A class then did the exact same thing, but in Canada. Okay, so same surveys with the same rules implying. Okay, and so these are some example photos that came from Canada, and this came from the school survey. And in the school survey, we asked them to take a look at how trash is collected. We actually took a look at the bento boxes, but a lot of students were taking pictures of their water bottles, what we call the sweetos here. And so they took notice that in the schools in Canada, they actually have water bottle refill stations. They took notice of the kind of water bottles that were there. They were taking notice of these kind of a barrier-free design of the trash cans, okay? And so some of the examples that the students were writing, okay, so the many different trash cans, the water server, so that was the water station, and then a third student kind of recognized that, a lot of us at school in Japan tend to buy water bottles when, because we have the vending machines that are very convenient. But that wasn't so much in Canada. Okay. So finishing off part 3, exact same presentation model with the A class presenting to the B class. So again, this is the school group. You can see that they were focusing on how the trash cans were designed, how water bottles are used in place of PET bottles. Then, towards the end of their second year, we had a representative from the A class and the B class put a presentation together to present to the entire school. Now, one of the big things of the Litterless campaign is to present information to, stakeholders, to the community and whatnot. And so that was the purpose of this presentation. This was the only presentation conducted in Japanese. Everything else had been conducted in English. Okay. So, after all that was done, going into the third year, it was time to put together a model UN. Okay, and so the agenda that we use for the Model United Nations here is called the Crisis of Pollution and Waste, which was actually one of 3 crises identified by the United Nations Environment Program. And so this actually fit quite nicely into the litterless campaign that we were conducting. And we decided to focus on plastic waste, e-waste, and fast fashion waste. So plastic waste, they're very much already kind of familiar with, as the majority of their discussions were already involved in that. E-waste and fast fashion waste would have been new to them, but there's a very strong relation to the students that made it kind of valuable to them. Now, one of the good things about the Litterless campaign is that we had access to the other 17 schools involved. And so we were able to get students. So if you don't know Model United Nations, these are where you have groups or teams of people representing countries around the world. And so this particular pair was representing Oman. And we were able to get them to create a video asking questions specifically about the topics involved in the Model United Nations. We were able to send that out to the Litterless Campaign School in Oman, and they were very graciously able to reply those questions to them. We were able to do this with Oman, Mexico, and about 2 or 3 other countries as well. So that was actually kind of a nice plus that we've never done as part of our Model UN preparations. Preparation, fairly simple. They need to identify problems. They need to explain what those problems are or the cause of the problems. They need to come up with their own solution. So this is kind of where their research comes from. And then they need to explain the effects of those solutions. Okay? And all of that is represented in what's called a draft resolution. Usually the preambulars are actually written by the teachers based on the content that they are given in class. And then the operative clauses, which are the solutions and the effects of solutions, are what the students focus on writing. And so I can give you a bit of a taste of how that's done. Let's see here. Yeah. Okay. So one of the important things of the MUN, it's not so much about the agenda and the information, but learning how to come to consensus, how to make compromise, okay, through discussions. And so the very first activity that we had them do was to identify what is crisis, what is pollution, what is waste, okay? And so each individual student had to come up with their own definition. Then these students were put into small groups, and based on all the individuals' definition, they had to make a compromise of one single definition. And then from those small groups, it was presented to the class, and then as a class, they had to come up with one single definition, okay? And so that kind of practice becomes actually quite important when they're putting those draft resolutions together during the Model United Nations. When we first introduce, we always talk about their rights as children. And then one of those rights just happens to be a right to a clean and healthy environment. And so when we're presenting this information to the students, it's not so much about what's the right answer, what's the wrong answer, but what do you think and why? And so a lot of these activities are just kind of check boxes. Do you think this is true for you? Do you think it's not true for you? Okay. If you check that off, you need to explain why. Okay. And then we also have a lot of translation exercises, but these translation, again, is for the benefit of practicing consensus and compromise. So we take them through the exact same idea. As individuals, they come up with a translation, without using K-ties or anything like that. Then they put them in the small groups to agree on a translation, and then that small group, then as a full class, has to agree on a translation. So it's kind of this scaffold up to a compromise solution there. Okay? And so when we get into the actual topics themselves, we got a lot of gap fill activities, but the way that these gap fill activities work is that neither the student nor the teacher has the answer. And so students have to kind of guess what they think the answer is. They have to explain why they think that is. And then the student and the teacher together, okay, let's go on to Google and let's see if we can figure out what the correct answer actually is. Okay? And doing it that way, I have seen gives students a more of a, oh, kind of response. Okay? The information actually becomes more meaningful to them. We'll also teach them how to read infographics, how to paraphrase infographics, and a lot of discussions about, okay, think about your own life. Okay, how does this relate to you? E-waste, again, translation activity, exact same thing. And then this one was actually kind of an opposite. This one was actually kind of interesting because when we were looking at e-waste, I decided to have them look at the e-waste laws of Japan and to kind of paraphrase what that law was in English, and our students had a lot of trouble doing that. Okay, why did you have a lot of trouble doing that? Because even in Japanese, that law was extremely difficult for them to understand. Okay, so when we're thinking about problems and solutions here, okay, what do you think is a problem about e-waste in Japan? Well, it's hard to understand exactly what it is we need to do. Okay, what's the solution? We need a simpler definition of that law, right? And so that was one of the many discussions that the students had about that. All right, so more, let's see, more gap fill there. Introduction to fast fashion, so same thing with the translation. Could they identify fast fashion brands here in Japan? And then going back to a specific literalist campaign activity, which was to do a photo contest for their young reporters for the environment. And so every student did it. We had to choose 3 to send in, and 2 of them actually came back as finalists, though we didn't have any winners. This was actually one of the finalist photos. So this is our student. That's her little brother. He never ate the plastic, I promise you. But they had that. They had a paragraph they had to write about that. So quite happy about what she was able to accomplish there. Okay. So as part of trying to figure out solutions, we had introduced circular economy to them. So another infographic that they had to explain and paraphrase. Then we had 3 different case studies, 1 case study for each topic. And we tried to look at different areas of the different roles. So for fast fashion, we looked at Iquique, Chile, and their fast fashion dunes. So a little reading that was rewritten for A2 level. We had them look at a Google Earth. We had them look at the original article. We had them look at a YouTube. So very much trying to make the information as accessible as possible to every student. Okay. Then after all that information, identify problems, explain the cause of the problems, write out solutions, try to explain the effects of those solutions. Going back to relate those to the circular economy, making a list, and then after all that, okay, let's write the operative clauses. Okay. We did the same thing with, let's see, this one is the e-waste. So with e-waste, we had them look at a scrapyard in Ghana, which is considered the largest e-waste scrapyard in the world. Same thing. And with the plastic waste, we had them look at the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. And exact same process there. Had a couple infographics there they had to explain. YouTube video to watch. And then wash, rinse, and repeat. Exact same function there to write out the operative clauses. And so that's kind of the project in a nutshell. Again, it's the only project out of the entire Literalist Campaign group that actually had a 3-year plan. We were able to initiate this into our school's curriculum without really alternating the curriculum at all. And the students really had a lot of positive feedback about it. And so collecting feedback was usually through like essay or paragraph writing. And UNESCO actually also had the students conduct surveys with a kind of a control group and experimental group, I guess is what you would want us to call it. To demonstrate that the students that were involved in the Literalist Campaign actually had a higher cognitive, higher understanding of the waste issues that were being presented. So that's our Literalist Campaign there, and that's the end of this presentation. Thank you very much. I think there's like 1 minute for...
Yeah, do you want to take a question or something?
I have a question.
Sure.
All right. So I was curious, what sources did you use to confirm the information? Besides Wikipedia?
So we use reports from the United Nations.
Oh, cool.
Also, in this resources here, I got a link to a textbook that I use. That's a CLIL textbook, focuses on SDGs. And so a lot of the questions, a lot of the gap fill activities kind of came from there. But also, we really do emphasize that one resource is not enough to verify that the information you see is the correct one. So they usually need to find at least two to verify that the information is correct.
You see, I teach at university, and I wonder still why my students come and try to reference a YouTube video when they have to write an essay. So.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's actually a prerequisite activity that we have them do before we get into Model United Nations that focuses on debate and debate preparations. And, you know, we're really heavy on, you know, you need at least two resources that doesn't say according to Google, that doesn't say according to Wikipedia, but it actually has to be from a newspaper or some other viable source. So we do practice that with them.
So, and the second question, do you give them any awareness of class distinction when you talk about these practices of recycling? Because obviously they are not poor.
Can you say that again?
Do you talk about class distinctions when you talk about, okay, recycling practices in Canada, you're obviously talking about cultural aspect to it. How about class? Because obviously both your students and their host families are not really impoverished.
Yeah, we do. I mean, because we do show a lot of visuals to them. So when we're talking about the different countries, the exchanges between the video exchanges that we had between them actually demonstrated some of the differences as well. I think the interesting thing about our school in particular is that we actually do have a lot of low-income households that represent our students. So they do have the opportunity to see the distinct differences in different aspects, I think. Yeah.
Excuse me. I participated in MUN when I was in the university, and you're not always given the, so to speak, more powerful countries. Did you teach your students at any time, how it is to be one of the less recognized countries? Like we did that first one about making definitions. Not everyone has an equal voice to define the problem, let alone the terms of what you're talking about. So that might be a good way to introduce students, how not to always be in a position of power, because at the MUN, you're not going to always receive the bigger country. When I was recognized one of the better delegates, our country was very small, but we negotiated behind the scenes, made consensus with different parties.
As this particular MUN is more geared towards using English, what's the more powerful country, what's the weaker country doesn't necessarily come into focus. The most important thing is being able to compromise and come to consensus on the solutions that they present to the floor. So what country they represent is probably not as important as it would be in most competitive MUNs.
That's how they use it,
Right.
the language.
Right. Okay? All right. Thank you very much.